Join us for an inspiring tale of love, loss, and renewal. Lucas, once trapped by grief, finds new purpose when Ella steps into his life, sparking a journey that transforms not just his world, but an entire community. What begins as a personal healing process unfolds into a powerful story of resilience and hope as they rebuild the mansion and create a space that touches countless lives. But will they face new challenges as their vision grows? And how do they balance love and legacy as their impact spreads? Find out in this story of second chances and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe for more. Let us know in the comments what you think their future holds. Lucas Bennett stood at the edge of the gathering, the garden around him swathed in twilight. The rustle of leaves and the low murmur of voices felt disconnected from his own thoughts. The evening air, once warm and inviting, had grown cold as memories surfaced unbidden. The guests, friends, colleagues, well-wishers, milled around, their expressions etched with sympathetic lines as they glanced at him and quickly looked away. The memorial for Mia, his late wife, was drawing to a close, and Lucas felt as though he were suffocating. The photo of Mia on the easel beside him captured her mid-laugh, a moment so vivid it hurt to look at. He turned away, eyes burning as he tried to steady his breath. A hand rested on his shoulder. Lucas turned to find David Marks, his business partner and oldest friend, watching him with concern. "You don't have to stay out here," David said, voice low. "People understand." Lucas shook his head, jaw clenched. "It's not that. It's just—" David nodded, the rest unspoken. They both knew the weight of grief, but only Lucas carried the particular burden of losing Mia. He excused himself and slipped into the quiet confines of the mansion. The grand foyer, with its marble floors and towering windows, felt cavernous and cold. Shadows stretched long across the room, and for a moment Lucas swore he heard Mia's laughter echoing in the stillness. He shook the thought away, crossing into his office and closing the door behind him. The silence pressed in, and he sank into the leather chair, head in his hands. He couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a house full of memories, suffocated by grief. But moving forward felt like betrayal, and the idea of stepping back into the world was daunting. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Lucas's office, casting golden patterns on the wooden floors. Samantha Reed, his assistant, knocked once before stepping in, a tablet in hand and a determined expression on her face. "Lucas, we need to talk," she began, her voice firm but tinged with compassion. Lucas looked up, fatigue evident in the lines around his eyes. "About what?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "The board is worried. Investors are losing confidence with you being so withdrawn," Samantha said, placing the tablet on his desk. The screen displayed a list of canceled meetings and missed public engagements. Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm aware, Sam. I just need more time. With all due respect, time isn't what we have," she said gently. "The media is starting to speculate, and the company needs stability." Lucas leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the silence stretched. Samantha's eyes softened. "Lucas, I know it's hard. No one expects you to move on overnight, but maybe there's another way. You need someone who can help you face the public without feeling so alone." He frowned, not understanding. "A companion," Samantha clarified. "Temporary, just for appearances. It could take the pressure off and help you transition back." Lucas's initial reaction was to scoff, but the more he considered it, the more the idea rooted itself in his mind. Was it really so different from the facade he'd already been keeping up? He nodded slowly. "Maybe I'll think about it." Samantha's expression softened into a small smile. "That's all I ask." That evening, the mansion was quieter than usual, the ticking of the grandfather clock marking the passage of time. Lucas sat in front of his computer, scrolling through profiles that Samantha had discreetly sent over. He scanned each one, barely registering the polished faces and clinical descriptions. Then he paused. Ella Turner's profile stood out, not because of an impressive resume or a polished photograph, but because her smile seemed genuine, unposed. She was a personal chef and event organizer, her profile filled with warmth and details about community events she'd helped organize. Beneath her picture was a short description: passionate about bringing joy and creating meaningful connections. Something stirred within Lucas, a faint memory of the ease with which Mia had filled their home with laughter. He hesitated, finger hovering over the contact button. Was this what his life had come to, hiring someone to pretend to be part of it? The idea felt wrong, yet the loneliness gnawed at him, relentless and insistent. Finally, he clicked. The next afternoon, Ella Turner walked into the mansion, her eyes taking in the grand entryway with barely concealed awe. She wore a simple dress and carried herself with confidence, despite the slight nervousness in her eyes. Lucas watched her from the other end of the room, studying the way she moved, the way she seemed to radiate warmth. "Mr. Bennett," she greeted, extending her hand. "Lucas," he corrected, taking her hand in a firm shake. He noticed her grip was steady, reassuring. "Thank you for considering me for this unique position," Ella said, a slight smile on her lips. Lucas's own lips twitched in response, almost forming a smile. "It is unique," he admitted. "I want you to understand what this is. Public appearances, nothing more." "Understood," Ella said, her expression serious. "But while I'm here, I'll do my best to help." The sincerity in her voice caught Lucas off guard, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. "Good," he managed finally. "We'll start with the charity gala this weekend." Ella's eyes widened for a split second before she nodded. "I'll be ready." As she left, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of anticipation. It was small, fragile, but it was there. And for the first time since Mia's death, he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't always feel so lost. The night of the gala arrived, and Lucas adjusted his tie in front of the mirror, his reflection pale and uncertain. He glanced at his watch, then at the door, just as a soft knock echoed through the room. Ella stepped inside, dressed in a simple but elegant gown that seemed to capture the room's light. She smiled nervously. "Ready?" Lucas felt the knot in his chest loosen slightly. "As I'll ever be." The drive to the gala was quiet, filled with a tension that neither of them dared to break. When they arrived, the lights and noise washed over them like a wave. Lucas instinctively tensed, but Ella's voice broke through. "Breathe," she said softly, touching his arm. "We're in this together." Lucas met her eyes, and for the first time he believed it. They stepped into the crowd, and as the night unfolded, Ella's laughter and easy conversation softened the whispers and the wary glances. She was the lifeline he hadn't realized he needed, and for a few hours, Lucas felt almost normal. The first rays of dawn filtered into the room, casting soft golden streaks across the walls. Lucas sat at the kitchen counter, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The mansion was quiet, a stark contrast to the noise and activity of the gala the night before. He took a sip, letting the warmth ease the tension still lingering in his body. Footsteps echoed down the hall, and Ella appeared, dressed casually in a simple blouse and jeans. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked more relaxed, though a trace of last night's energy still glimmered in her eyes. "Morning," she said, sliding into the seat opposite him. "Morning," Lucas replied, surprised by the ease in his voice. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but comfortable, an unexpected change from the usual emptiness that filled the mansion. Ella glanced around, taking in the high ceilings and polished counters. "It's quiet here," she remarked, as if reading his thoughts. "Too quiet sometimes," Lucas admitted. He set down his cup, fingers drumming lightly on the surface. "Last night went better than I expected." Ella's face lit up with a smile. "It did? You were great, by the way. The guests were genuinely happy to see you." Lucas's lips twitched into a shadow of a smile. "That's because of you." "Thank you, Ella." She shrugged, but the sincerity in her eyes didn't waver. "You're welcome. I meant it when I said I was here to help." For a moment, Lucas found himself wanting to say more, to express the gratitude that felt lodged in his chest. But the words wouldn't come, so he simply nodded, allowing the silence to stretch comfortably between them. A few days later, Lucas found himself drawn to a room he hadn't entered in months. The library was one of Mia's favorite places in the mansion. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, and the smell of old paper and polished wood lingered in the air. Lucas stood by the large window that overlooked the garden, memories playing like a film in his mind. The sound of footsteps behind him broke the spell. He turned to see Ella standing at the threshold, her expression soft. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said, taking a step back. "It's fine," Lucas said, motioning for her to come in. He gestured to the room. This was Mia's place. She loved reading here. Ella's eyes drifted over the shelves and the worn armchair in the corner. "It's beautiful. She must have had good taste." "She did," Lucas said, a note of fondness in his voice that surprised him. He expected the ache that usually came with these memories, but it was dulled, as if the room itself was accepting Ella's presence. Ella walked to the nearest shelf and ran her fingers lightly over the spines of the books. "It's okay to remember, Lucas. It doesn't mean you're stuck." The simplicity of her words struck him, resonating deeper than he anticipated. "Sometimes it feels like remembering is the only way to keep her alive," he said quietly. Ella looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "And sometimes remembering can help you live too." Lucas held her gaze for a moment before looking away, the room growing quiet once more. For the first time, it felt less like a mausoleum, and more like a room filled with stories waiting to be shared. The mansion's tranquility was interrupted one afternoon by the sharp ring of the doorbell. Lucas was in his office, sorting through paperwork, when Samantha stepped in. "Lucas, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. "It's Grace." Lucas's stomach tightened at the mention of Mia's sister. He hadn't seen Grace since the memorial, and the last encounter had been strained at best. He stood, smoothing the front of his shirt as he walked to the foyer. Grace stood by the entrance, arms crossed, and a guarded expression on her face. Her dark hair was pulled back, and she looked as composed as ever. But there was something in her eyes, an edge of sadness, perhaps, that softened her usual confidence. "Grace," Lucas said, stopping a few feet away. "It's good to see you." "Is it?" she replied, one eyebrow arched. The silence between them felt thick, weighted by unspoken words. "I've been hearing things, Lucas, that you're back in the public eye, with someone new by your side." He bristled at her tone, but took a breath before responding. "Ella's helping me with events, that's all. It's not what you think." "And what do I think?" Grace countered, her eyes narrowing. "That you're moving on, forgetting Mia?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "I'm not forgetting her, Grace. But I can't live like this anymore, trapped in grief." Grace's gaze softened, her posture relaxing slightly. "I don't want you to be trapped, Lucas. But I worry that you're using Ella as a distraction." Lucas glanced past her, toward the hall where Ella stood watching, her expression unreadable. "It's not like that," he said, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince, Grace, Ella, or himself. Grace nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. "I hope not. For your sake and for hers." She turned and left, the echo of the closing door reverberating through the hall. Lucas stood there, the air between him and Ella filled with a tension that neither of them knew how to break. The following day, the mansion felt quieter than ever. Lucas sat in the library, eyes unfocused, as he stared at the pages of a book he wasn't really reading. Grace's words had settled into his mind like an unwelcome guest, feeding his doubts. The soft knock on the door made him look up. Ella stood in the doorway, a tentative smile on her face. "Mind if I join you?" Lucas nodded, watching as she walked over and sat across from him. The silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "Grace didn't mean to hurt you," Ella said finally, her voice low. "She's just protective." "I know," Lucas said, setting the book aside. "It's just, everything feels so complicated." Ella leaned forward, her eyes searching his. "It doesn't have to be. We're allowed to find happiness, Lucas. Even after loss." He met her gaze, the sincerity in her eyes piercing through the fog of his thoughts. "I'm trying, Ella. I really am." They sat in silence for a moment longer, the weight between them shifting into something more manageable. For the first time, Lucas felt that trying might just be enough. As the days passed, the tension in the house began to fade, replaced by a tentative sense of normalcy. Lucas and Ella fell into a routine, sharing breakfast and discussing the day's plans. Lucas found himself looking forward to these moments, the quiet companionship they shared. One morning, as they stood in the kitchen sipping coffee, Ella laughed at something Lucas said. The sound was warm, filling the room in a way that pushed back the silence. Lucas smiled, the expression coming more naturally now. It's been a long time since this place felt alive. Ella's gaze softened, a flicker of hope sparking in her eyes. It's never too late to change that. Lucas set down his mug, the morning light catching the gold in his hair. Maybe not, he said, more to himself than to her. The past still loomed, but for the first time, Lucas could see the path ahead, not just for himself, but for the life they might build, one day at a time. The winter chill nipped at their faces as Lucas and Ella walked down the snow-dusted streets of downtown. It was their first public outing that wasn't related to a formal event or charity function. The decision had been spontaneous. Ella had suggested it over breakfast, and Lucas, surprising himself, agreed. They stopped at a local cafe, its windows glowing with the warm, inviting light of the holiday season. Inside, the hum of conversation and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Lucas took a seat by the window, watching Ella's face as she took in the cozy atmosphere. "I didn't think you'd actually say yes," Ella said, her eyes dancing with amusement. Lucas chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "I didn't either. But I'm glad I did." They ordered coffee, and Ella leaned back, her expression softening as she watched the snow fall outside. "This is nice," she said, almost wistfully. "It's good to see you like this, out in the world." Lucas looked at her, the glow of the cafe's lights catching in her eyes. "It feels different," he admitted, but not in a bad way. Ella's smile was gentle, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come since their initial agreement. But underneath the warmth of the moment, Lucas felt the stirrings of doubt. Was this just a temporary reprieve, or could it be more? A week later, Lucas was in his office when Samantha knocked and stepped inside with an envelope in her hand. "This just came in," she said, placing it on his desk. Lucas picked up the envelope, the formal insignia of the Anderson Foundation catching his eye. He tore it open and read the elegant script inside. An invitation to co-host their annual charity gala. He set the letter down, a mix of emotions surging through him. The gala was an event he and Mia had always attended together, and the thought of facing it now felt overwhelming. "Are you going to do it?" Samantha asked, her voice careful. Lucas hesitated. "I don't know." "You should consider it," she said. "It's a chance to show everyone that you're back, but more importantly, it's a chance for you." After she left, Lucas stared at the letter for a long time. The room felt colder, shadows gathering in the corners. Finally, he picked up his phone and sent a quick message to Ella. "Would you consider co-hosting the gala with me?" Her reply came almost immediately. "Of course." The days leading up to the gala were a blur of preparations. Lucas and Ella worked together, coordinating with event planners and making decisions on decor, music, and speeches. It was exhausting, but Lucas found himself looking forward to the moments they spent huddled over plans, sharing quiet laughs. One afternoon, as they reviewed the guest list in the library, Ella paused and glanced at Lucas. "Are you okay with this? I mean, this event? It was important to you and Mia." Lucas met her eyes, the familiar ache settling in his chest. "It was," he admitted, "but I think it's time I face it. I don't want to keep running from memories." Ella nodded, her expression a mix of understanding and admiration. "I'll be right there with you." Lucas smiled, the gratitude in his heart unspoken but palpable. "I know." The night of the gala arrived, and the mansion buzzed with a nervous energy. Ella stood in the hallway, adjusting the drape of her gown, a deep blue that matched the night sky. Lucas stepped out of his room, straightening his tie. When he saw her, he paused, a smile tugging at his lips. "You look stunning," he said, his voice low. Ella blushed, a rare sight that made Lucas's chest tighten. "Thank you." "You don't look so bad yourself," she replied, a playful glint in her eyes. The drive to the venue was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. As they stepped out of the car and into the venue, the crowd turned to watch them. Whispers of recognition and surprise rippled through the room, but Lucas kept his focus on Ella and the warmth of her presence beside him. The night unfolded in a whirlwind of handshakes, introductions, and speeches. When it was Lucas's turn to speak, he stepped onto the stage, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He glanced at Ella, who nodded encouragingly from the sidelines. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Lucas began, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. "This gala has always been a reminder of the good we can do when we come together. This year it's also a reminder that even in the face of loss, we can find hope again." Applause filled the room, and as Lucas stepped down, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Ella met him at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she whispered. Lucas reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We did." As the evening wound down, Lucas and Ella found a quiet spot on the balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air brushed against their skin, and the sounds of laughter and music drifted from inside. "Tonight was different," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "In a good way?" Ella asked, turning to face him. "In the best way," he replied, his gaze softening. He took a deep breath, the confession building in his chest. "Ella, this started as an arrangement, a way to make life easier. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that." Ella's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Lucas? I'm not saying I have it all figured out," he continued, stepping closer. "But I know that being with you makes the days less heavy. And I don't want that to end." Ella reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Me neither," she said, a smile breaking through. "But let's take this one step at a time." Lucas nodded, the tension in his chest loosening for the first time in what felt like years. "One step at a time," he echoed, a promise in his voice. As they stood together, the city lights stretching out before them, Lucas felt a warmth settle deep within. It was the beginning of something new, fragile, hopeful, and undeniably real. The morning after the gala, the mansion was alive with the glow of shared triumph. Lucas sat at the breakfast table, nursing a cup of coffee while his thoughts drifted back to the night before. The feel of Ella's hand in his, the quiet understanding that passed between them, lingered. Ella walked into the room, her hair tied back, and a soft smile on her face. "Good morning," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee and sitting across from him. "Morning," Lucas replied, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there in years. They fell into a comfortable silence, the weight of their shared realization from the night before still fresh. "I think last night was a turning point," Ella said, her tone cautious but hopeful. Lucas met her eyes, nodding. "It was. I meant what I said, Ella. I want this to be more than an arrangement, but I know we need to take things slow." She nodded, her smile growing. "Slow sounds good." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Lucas's phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen, another request for a public appearance. The weight of expectations still loomed, but for the first time, it didn't feel as overwhelming. He had someone to share it with. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and Ella found themselves falling into a rhythm. They attended public events together, and Ella's natural warmth smoothed over Lucas's guarded exterior. But as the days passed, doubts began to creep into Ella's mind. Was this new chapter of their relationship strong enough to withstand the weight of Lucas's past? One evening, after a particularly long day, Ella sat in the library, the fire casting flickering shadows across the room. Lucas entered, noting the pensive look on her face. "You seem far away," he said, taking a seat beside her. Ella hesitated, then sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if we're building something real, or if it's just a way to fill the void." Lucas's brow furrowed, his heart sinking. "It's real to me, Ella, but I understand if it feels uncertain." She met his gaze, searching for reassurance. "I just need to know that this isn't about what you've lost, but what you want moving forward." Lucas took her hand, the gesture firm and sincere. "I won't pretend that the past doesn't affect me, but being with you feels like the first choice I've made for myself in a long time." The sincerity in his voice eased the tension in Ella's chest, and she nodded. "That's all I needed to hear." The next day, Grace Reynolds appeared at the mansion, her expression softer than the last time she'd visited. Lucas met her in the foyer, surprised but not unwelcome. "I heard about the gala," Grace said, a faint smile touching her lips. "You did well, Lucas." Lucas felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Thanks, Grace. It meant a lot to have Ella there." Grace nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I came to apologize. I've been holding on to my grief and projecting it onto you. It wasn't fair." The tension in Lucas's shoulders eased. "I understand. We both lost her, and that's not something you just move past." They stood in silence for a moment before Grace continued. "Ella's good for you. I see it now. Just make sure you're good for her, too." Lucas's throat tightened at the words. "I will," he promised. As Grace left, Lucas felt a sense of closure begin to form, like a wound that had started to heal. He turned to find Ella standing at the top of the staircase, watching the exchange with a soft expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Lucas replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I think it will be." With Grace's visit still fresh in their minds, Lucas and Ella focused on nurturing their newfound relationship. They spent evenings cooking simple meals together, laughing when recipes went wrong and savoring the quiet moments that filled the gaps in conversation. One night, as they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by the remnants of a haphazard pasta dinner, Ella spoke up. "This feels normal," she said, a touch of wonder in her voice. "I haven't felt that in a long time." Lucas reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "Me neither. And I don't want to take it for granted." Ella smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. The warmth between them was steady, building a foundation that felt real. Just as things seemed to settle into place, an unexpected call interrupted their peaceful routine. Lucas's phone buzzed one afternoon with news that an old investor was threatening to pull out, citing concerns about the company's future direction. The worry gnawed at Lucas, old insecurities flaring up. He spent long hours in his office, buried in documents and phone calls, the tension seeping back into the mansion's walls. Ella noticed the change, her own worries resurfacing. One evening she found Lucas pacing in his office, the blue glow of his computer casting sharp shadows across his face. "Lucas," she said gently, stepping inside. "Talk to me." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "It's just work. Everything feels like it's balancing on a knife's edge, and I don't want it to fall apart." Ella crossed the room, placing her hands on his shoulders. "You don't have to carry this alone. I'm here, remember?" Lucas exhaled, the tension in his muscles easing slightly at her touch. "I know. Sometimes it feels like if I let go, everything will fall apart." "Maybe it won't," she said softly. "Maybe it'll just change." He looked into her eyes, the truth of her words settling into the spaces where doubt lingered. They stood like that for a moment, the office growing quiet as the storm of worry began to subside. The stress at work took its toll over the following days. Lucas threw himself into managing the crisis, his demeanor growing more withdrawn with each passing evening. Ella watched, a gnawing worry tightening in her chest as the familiar walls he'd started to lower began to rise again. One night, after another tense dinner filled with half-answered questions and strained silence, Ella set her fork down and met Lucas's eyes. "We need to talk." Lucas sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Not tonight, Ella." "I can't." "It's always not tonight," she said, her voice trembling. "I know this is hard, but shutting me out isn't the answer." Lucas's jaw tightened, the stress of the past weeks bubbling over. "I'm not shutting you out. I'm trying to keep everything from falling apart." Ella stood, the chair scraping against the floor. "Do you hear yourself? You're back to carrying everything alone, like before. We promised we'd face things together." Lucas's eyes flashed, anger and frustration mixing with guilt. "Maybe I don't know how to do that, Ella. Maybe I never did." The room fell silent, the echoes of their words lingering. Ella's eyes softened, sadness pooling in them. "I can't be here if you're going to keep pushing me away." Lucas opened his mouth to respond but found no words. The room felt colder as Ella walked out, the distance between them stretching further than ever. The mansion felt hollow after Ella left. Days turned into a blur, the silence ringing louder than any argument. Lucas threw himself into work, avoiding the empty spaces that reminded him of her. But the more he worked, the less it helped. The ache in his chest only grew. Samantha noticed the change, her concern palpable when she brought him a stack of papers one afternoon. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said, setting the papers on his desk. "I'm fine," Lucas said tersely, though they both knew it wasn't true. "Are you?" Samantha pressed, her voice softening. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're pushing everyone away again." Lucas's shoulders slumped, exhaustion weighing him down. "She left," he admitted, the words tasting bitter. "I don't know how to fix it." Samantha sighed, a mix of empathy and frustration crossing her face. "Maybe it starts with admitting that you need her, Lucas. You don't have to do this alone." The room was quiet after she left, Samantha's words echoing in his mind. He glanced at his phone, Ella's number at the top of his recent calls. He wanted to reach out, but doubt and fear held him back. Days turned into weeks, and the ache of Ella's absence only deepened. One evening, Lucas found himself driving through the quiet streets of the city. Without fully realizing it, he ended up in front of Ella's apartment building. The lights were on, and he could see her silhouette through the window, framed by the soft glow of a lamp. He sat there for a long moment, the cold creeping into the car as he wrestled with his hesitation. Finally, he stepped out and walked to her door, each step heavier than the last. He knocked, his heart pounding in the silence that followed. Ella opened the door, surprise and a hint of apprehension in her eyes. "Lucas," she said, the word a mix of relief and wariness. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice rough. "I've been trying to find the right words, but there aren't any. I know I pushed you away, and I hate that I did." Ella's eyes softened, though the distance between them still felt real. "Why did you?" Lucas looked down, guilt pressing on him. "Because I'm scared. I've been holding on to the idea that I need to manage everything alone. But the truth is, without you, it all feels meaningless." They stood in silence, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. Finally, Ella stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in," she said softly. The hours that followed were filled with conversation, raw and honest. Lucas spoke about his fears, his guilt over Mia, and the way he'd struggled to balance the past with the present. Ella shared her doubts, admitting how difficult it had been to feel like she was competing with a memory. "I don't want to be a replacement," Ella said, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're not," Lucas said, reaching for her hand. "You're the reason I started to feel alive again. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Ella squeezed his hand, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Then we need to rebuild, Lucas. One step at a time." Lucas nodded, the weight in his chest lightening for the first time in weeks. One step at a time. They sat together as the night deepened, the silence between them no longer heavy, but filled with the promise of something new. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and Ella worked to find their balance. They spent time together outside of the mansion, exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and rediscovering the things that made them laugh. The pressure of public appearances took a back seat, replaced by a focus on their relationship and the simple moments that kept them grounded. One evening, they found themselves back at the lakeside cabin. The moon cast a silver glow over the water, and the air was crisp with the promise of spring. Lucas took Ella's hand as they stood on the dock, the wood creaking beneath their feet. "This place used to remind me of everything I'd lost," he said. "Now it reminds me of what I've found." Ella looked at him, her smile soft and sincere. "I'm glad we're here together." Lucas turned to face her, a newfound determination in his eyes. "Ella, I know I don't have everything figured out, but I'm sure of this. I'm sure of us." She reached up, cupping his face with her hands. "That's all I need." The night air carried the quiet sounds of the lake and the rustling of leaves, a perfect backdrop to their shared silence. They stood there, hand in hand, ready to embrace whatever came next. As spring unfolded, Lucas and Ella settled into a new, balanced routine. The mansion that had once felt like a museum dedicated to loss now hummed with life. Mornings were spent in the sunlit kitchen, Ella teaching Lucas how to make her favorite recipes while they laughed over spilled flour and burnt toast. Evenings found them walking the estate's garden, the air filled with the soft scent of blooming flowers. Lucas returned to work with renewed energy, no longer weighed down by the shadow of grief alone. Ella, meanwhile, began consulting on small events and community dinners, reigniting her passion for creating connections through shared experiences. One afternoon, as they sat on the patio sharing lunch, Lucas looked up from his plate, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he began, setting down his fork. "What if we hosted a community event here at the mansion? Something that feels like a celebration, not just of the past, but of what we're building now." Ella's eyes lit up, excitement sparking in her smile. "I love that idea. It would be a way to bring people together, to show that this place is alive again." Lucas reached for her hand, the touch grounding them both. "Then let's do it." The weeks leading up to the event were filled with planning and anticipation. Invitations were sent, the garden was prepared with twinkling lights, and caterers bustled through the kitchen, guided by Ella's gentle direction. Samantha visited a few days before the event, her clipboard in hand and a smile on her face. "The guest list is set, and everything is on schedule. You've really turned things around, Lucas." Lucas glanced at Ella, who was laughing with a florist arranging bouquets. He smiled. "I didn't do it alone." The evening before the event, Lucas and Ella sat in the library, the house quiet around them. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm glow. "Are you nervous?" Ella asked, shifting to face him. "A little," Lucas admitted, "but it's the good kind of nervous. I want this to go well, for us and for everyone who's believed in us." Ella's eyes softened, her hand finding his. "It will. We're ready." The night of the event arrived, and guests began to fill the garden, their conversations blending with the soft music playing in the background. Lanterns hung from the branches of trees, casting a warm glow over the tables set with simple, elegant centerpieces. Lucas stood near the entrance, greeting friends, colleagues, and neighbors as they arrived. Grace appeared with a warm smile, her earlier reservations now replaced by genuine support. "The place looks incredible, Lucas," she said, hugging him briefly. "Thank you, Grace. It means a lot to have you here." Ella moved through the crowd, checking on details and making sure everything was running smoothly. When she caught Lucas's eye across the garden, he felt a swell of pride and affection. This was what he had been missing, this sense of belonging, of living fully in the present. As the evening progressed, Lucas stepped up to a small stage set near the fountain, tapping the microphone to draw attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady and clear. "This house has seen its share of silence and loss, but tonight it's full of life again. That's because of all of you, and because of one person who reminded me that life is meant to be shared." His eyes found Ella in the crowd, and she smiled, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "This is just the beginning," Lucas continued, "a reminder that even after the hardest moments, there's hope, joy, and a future to build." The crowd erupted in applause, and Lucas stepped down, heart pounding as Ella met him halfway. She reached up and kissed him, the cheers and laughter around them a backdrop to their private moment. As the night deepened, the garden filled with laughter, music, and stories. Guests mingled, sharing memories and hopes for the future. Lucas found himself talking with people he hadn't spoken to in years, their conversations filled with warmth instead of pity. Ella moved gracefully through the crowd, accepting compliments and sharing stories about the planning of the event. When Lucas caught up with her, they shared a quiet smile. "I can't believe how perfect this turned out," Ella said, her eyes shining. "It's because of you," Lucas replied, his voice filled with sincerity. "You brought this place back to life." The music shifted to a slow, melodic tune, and Lucas extended a hand. "Dance with me?" Ella's smile widened as she took his hand. They moved to the center of the garden, joining other couples. The world seemed to narrow to just them, the weight of the past lifting as they swayed together under the canopy of stars. "I've never been happier," Lucas whispered, his forehead resting gently against hers. Ella's eyes met his, the truth of his words mirrored in her expression. "Neither have I." The weeks after the event were filled with quiet contentment. Lucas and Ella continued to build their life together, taking on projects that inspired them and spending evenings lost in each other's company. The mansion, once a place haunted by memories, now buzzed with warmth and purpose. One afternoon, as they sat on the back porch overlooking the garden, Lucas turned to Ella, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he said. Ella raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile on her lips. "Oh? Planning another event already?" Lucas laughed, the sound easy and unguarded. "Not quite. I was thinking more about what we're building here. Maybe something more permanent." Ella's eyes softened, understanding dawning. "I think I'd like that," she said, taking his hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Lucas leaned in, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Together?" he echoed, feeling the truth of that word deep in his chest. The garden stretched before them, a testament to their journey. It was a place that had once symbolized grief, but now stood as proof that love, hope, and resilience could grow in even the most unexpected places. And as the sun set, casting a warm glow over their world, Lucas and Ella knew that whatever came next, they were ready, one day at a time. Summer arrived, bringing with it warm days and golden evenings that Lucas and Ella spent planning new ventures. The idea of turning the mansion into a space that could host community events, charity dinners, and workshops took root, blending Lucas's philanthropic interests with Ella's passion for bringing people together. One morning, Ella woke to the sound of birds chirping outside the window. The soft light filtered through the curtains, casting a glow over the room. She stretched and turned to find Lucas already awake, a thoughtful expression on his face as he gazed at the ceiling. "Good morning," she said, her voice still tinged with sleep. "Morning," Lucas replied, turning to her with a small smile. "I was just thinking about the garden dinner we hosted and how much it changed things for us." Ella nodded, the memory bringing a warm feeling to her chest. "It was the first time this place really felt alive again." "I want to do more of that," Lucas said, sitting up. "I was thinking, why not turn part of the estate into a space for events? We could use it to support local artists, community projects, and fundraisers." Ella's eyes lit up, excitement bubbling to the surface. "I love that idea. It could be a place that brings people together, just like that night." Lucas took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Then let's make it happen." The project quickly became a shared focus for Lucas and Ella. Architects and planners were brought in to discuss renovations, and the estate buzzed with activity. Ella worked tirelessly on event ideas and community outreach, meeting with local leaders and organizing volunteer efforts. One afternoon, Grace stopped by to see the progress. She watched as Ella coordinated with a group of volunteers, setting up tables and chairs under the sprawling oaks. "You've really made this place come to life," Grace said to Lucas, who stood beside her. "I couldn't have done it without Ella," Lucas admitted, a note of pride in his voice. "She's turned this house into a home." Grace looked at him, a smile softening her features. "Mia would be proud of what you're doing. She always wanted this house to be filled with people and joy." Lucas's chest tightened at the mention of Mia, but instead of the familiar pang of grief, there was a sense of peace. "Thank you, Grace. That means more than you know." The day of the grand opening arrived, and the estate was transformed. String lights crisscrossed the garden, casting a warm glow over tables laden with food and handmade decorations. Local musicians played gentle tunes, and the air was filled with laughter and conversation. Lucas stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. Samantha, ever the efficient assistant, made sure everything ran smoothly, while Ella moved through the crowd, her energy infectious as she welcomed friends and newcomers alike. When most of the guests had arrived, Lucas took the stage, microphone in hand. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, his voice strong and clear. "This estate has a long history, and it's seen its share of loss. But tonight, it stands as a symbol of hope, community, and new beginnings." He paused, eyes searching for Ella. When he found her in the crowd, their eyes met, and she nodded encouragingly. "This wouldn't be possible without Ella Turner," Lucas continued, a smile spreading across his face. "She's brought life back to this place, and to me. I'm grateful to call her my partner in this and in life." Applause erupted, and Ella felt her cheeks warm as she made her way to Lucas's side. He wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We did it," he whispered. "We did," Ella replied, her eyes shining with emotion. As the night continued, guests mingled and shared stories. Ella found herself sitting with Samantha and Grace at one of the tables, watching the scene unfold. Samantha leaned in, grinning. "I have to admit, I didn't think Lucas would pull off something like this, but with you around, he's a changed man." Grace nodded in agreement, her expression thoughtful. "It's good to see him happy again," Ella smiled, a contented feeling settling in her chest. But before she could respond, Lucas appeared, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. He handed one to her and raised his in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice soft but clear. "To us," Ella added, clinking her glass against his. The bubbles fizzed, matching the lightness she felt inside. The music shifted to a livelier tune, and Lucas set his glass down, extending his hand to Ella. "Care to dance?" She laughed, placing her hand in his. "Always." They moved to the center of the garden, joining other couples under the lights. As they danced, the world around them seemed to blur, leaving only the rhythm of the music and the warmth of their connection. The night wound down, and the last of the guests trickled out, leaving Lucas and Ella alone in the soft glow of the garden lights. The quiet was soothing, a perfect end to a day that had felt almost magical. Lucas turned to Ella, the smile on his face touched with a hint of awe. "This feels right, doesn't it?" Ella nodded, stepping closer and wrapping her arms around him. "It does. I never thought I'd find a place, or a person, that felt like home. But here we are." He held her tightly, the weight of the past finally lightening as he accepted that moving forward didn't mean leaving behind what had come before. It meant carrying it with him, woven into the fabric of the life he was building with Ella. "Ella, I love you," Lucas said, the words slipping out with an ease that surprised him. Her breath caught, eyes glistening as she looked up at him. "I love you too, Lucas." The garden was quiet, the last notes of music fading into the night. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of promise, a testament to the journey they'd taken to get there and the future that awaited them. Together. With the grand opening behind them, Lucas and Ella found themselves settling into a new rhythm that felt both exhilarating and peaceful. The mansion's transformation into a community space brought a steady flow of visitors, people attending events, artists showcasing their work, and local charities using the space for fundraisers. The once quiet halls were now alive with voices and laughter. One afternoon, as Lucas walked through the main hall, he spotted Ella speaking with a group of volunteers, her hands moving animatedly as she described the plans for the next charity event. He paused, a small smile spreading across his face as he watched her. She noticed him, her smile widening as their eyes met. "Lucas, come join us," she called, waving him over. He approached, nodding to the group. "What are we planning this time?" "A community art showcase," Ella said, her eyes sparkling. "Local artists, live music, and food from neighborhood vendors." Lucas chuckled, the warmth of her enthusiasm infectious. "Sounds perfect." The group dispersed, leaving them alone in the hallway. Ella stepped closer, slipping her hand into his. "I still can't believe how far we've come." Lucas's gaze softened. "It's because of you? You showed me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a new way to honor the past." Ella's expression turned serious for a moment, her eyes searching his. "Lucas, we did this together. You made the choice to open up, to let people back in. That's not something I could do for you?" He nodded, the truth of her words settling deep in his chest. "I know, but I'm grateful every day that you were here when I needed you most." A few weeks later, on a warm afternoon, Ella found herself feeling uncharacteristically tired. She brushed it off at first, attributing it to the long hours she'd been putting into organizing the community events. But when the fatigue didn't fade and other subtle signs began to appear, she decided to make an appointment with her doctor. When she came home that evening, Lucas was in the library, reading through notes for an upcoming board meeting. He glanced up as she entered, taking in her slightly pale face and tired smile. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern creasing his brow. Ella sat down beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "I have news," she said, her voice soft but steady. Lucas set the papers aside, fully turning to face her. "What is it?" A smile broke through the worry on her face. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Lucas stared at her, the words hanging in the air like an electric charge. Then, his expression shifted from shock to joy. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ella nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes." Lucas pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly as the reality of their new chapter sank in. He leaned back, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I can't believe it. This is incredible." They sat together in the quiet library, the gravity of their news making the room feel warmer, more alive. The journey they had started was about to take an unexpected turn, and for the first time in years, Lucas felt ready to embrace the unknown. As news of Ella's pregnancy spread among their friends and family, the mansion buzzed with excitement. Samantha arrived one afternoon with a bag full of parenting books, placing them on the table with a triumphant smile. "Consider this your crash course in parenting," she said, laughing at Lucas's wide-eyed expression. "Thanks, Sam." "No pressure at all," Lucas joked, flipping through a book titled "The First Year, a Survival Guide." Ella giggled, reaching for a book. "We'll be fine," she said, looking at Lucas with a reassuring smile. "We've tackled harder things together." Grace visited often, offering advice and stories from when Mia was young. The conversations were bittersweet but healing, allowing both Lucas and Grace to acknowledge the past while looking forward. "Ella, you're going to be an amazing mom," Grace said one afternoon, her voice tinged with emotion. "And Lucas, you've come so far. Mia would be proud." Lucas's throat tightened, but he nodded, a smile breaking through. "Thank you, Grace." As Ella's pregnancy progressed, Lucas found himself rediscovering old fears and new hopes. There were moments when he woke in the middle of the night, the weight of responsibility pressing on his chest. But then he'd feel Ella's hand resting gently on his, grounding him. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Ella leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the time," Lucas admitted. "But then I remember that we're not doing this alone. And that makes it easier." Ella squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "We'll be okay, Lucas. We're building something beautiful, and it's okay to be scared." The quiet assurance in her voice settled the anxiety that had been gnawing at him. He turned and kissed her temple. "With you, I know we will." The morning Ella went into labor was filled with the usual blend of excitement and nerves. Lucas paced the hospital waiting room, Samantha and Grace sitting nearby, offering words of comfort. Hours later, a nurse appeared with a smile. "Mr. Bennett, you can come in now." Lucas rushed into the room, his heart pounding as he saw Ella, tired but glowing, holding their newborn daughter. Tears stung his eyes as he approached, taking in the tiny life swaddled in Ella's arms. "Meet Grace Margaret Bennett," Ella said, her voice full of joy. Lucas reached out, gently touching his daughter's tiny hand. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only the three of them in that moment. "She's perfect," he whispered, pressing a kiss to Ella's forehead. "You're both perfect." Ella smiled, exhaustion mingled with bliss. "We did it." "Yes, we did," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. The first days at home with their newborn were a blur of late-night feedings, diaper changes, and the quiet awe that came with every tiny movement Grace made. The mansion, once a place of solitude, was now filled with the sounds of new life. Lucas sat in the nursery one night, holding Grace as she slept. The soft moonlight streamed through the window, casting a gentle glow. Ella leaned against the doorframe, watching him with a smile. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. Lucas shook his head, his eyes never leaving their daughter. "I just don't want to miss a moment." Ella crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We have a lifetime of moments, Lucas." He looked up at her, the love and gratitude in his eyes reflecting hers. "And I want to live every single one of them with you." The first few months as parents were filled with challenges and triumphs. Lucas and Ella found themselves balancing the sleepless nights with the joy of watching Grace's first smiles and hearing her cooing sounds. The mansion, once echoing with quiet solitude, now resonated with the soft hum of a new family's life. One morning, Lucas was attempting to make breakfast while holding Grace, who fussed in his arms. Ella walked in, taking in the scene with an amused smile. "Need a hand?" she asked, reaching for the spatula before the eggs could burn. "I thought I could manage," Lucas said with a sheepish grin. "Turns out multitasking isn't my strongest suit." Ella chuckled, gently taking Grace from him. "You're doing great. We're learning together, remember?" Lucas watched as Ella cradled Grace, the baby's cries fading as she settled into her mother's embrace. A wave of gratitude washed over him. He hadn't just found a partner. He'd found a partner who made him better. "Thank you," Lucas said, his voice sincere. "For what?" Ella asked, glancing at him with a soft smile. "For everything." As the weeks turned into months, Lucas and Ella learned to navigate the delicate balance between parenting, work, and their relationship. Lucas returned to work at the company, now infused with a renewed sense of purpose. The board, once concerned about his commitment, saw the change in him. A man no longer defined solely by loss, but by growth and resilience. Ella continued her involvement with community events, using the mansion's renovated spaces to host art showcases and fundraisers. One afternoon, as she organized details for an upcoming event, Samantha stopped by with a familiar grin. "Back at it already, I see," Samantha said, her tone light. Ella looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You know me, I can't sit still for too long." Samantha nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. "You and Lucas have really built something amazing here. It's not just the events or the renovations. It's the life you've brought back." Ella's smile deepened. "We did it together." One evening, Lucas was organizing old files when he stumbled upon an envelope tucked between pages of an old journal. It was a letter from Mia, written during one of their anniversaries. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, the familiar handwriting sparking a mixture of emotions. "Lucas, if you're reading this, it means you're looking back. I hope when you do, you see the joy we had, and not just the grief. Life isn't measured only by what we lose, but by what we carry forward. Love doesn't end, it transforms. Promise me that when the time comes, you'll let it lead you to where you need to be." The words settled over him like a balm, a reminder that his love for Mia didn't have to be a barrier to loving Ella. It could be part of what made him whole. As Lucas closed the letter, Ella walked in, noticing the shift in his expression. "Everything okay?" Lucas looked up, the edges of his eyes crinkling as he smiled. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "More than okay." He reached for her hand, pulling her close. "I was just reminded of something important. That love doesn't end. It changes, and it carries us forward." Ella wrapped her arms around him, understanding and warmth passing between them. In that moment, they stood not just as partners, but as a family strengthened by the past and looking forward to the future. The anniversary of the first community event they had hosted approached, and Lucas and Ella decided to celebrate it with another gathering. The estate was decorated with fairy lights and filled with friends, neighbors, and new faces that had become part of their growing circle. Grace, now crawling and babbling, was passed around by guests who adored her. Lucas found himself holding her as he walked through the garden, stopping to talk with guests and share stories. He watched as Ella moved gracefully through the crowd, laughing and chatting, embodying the spirit that had revived his life. As the evening wore on, Lucas made his way to the small stage set up near the fountain. He held Grace in one arm and tapped the microphone with his free hand, drawing attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said, his voice resonating over the crowd. "This place has become more than a home. It's become a symbol of what's possible when we open ourselves to new beginnings. And it's all because of the people standing here today." He glanced at Ella, who was watching him with a mix of pride and affection. "Ella, you showed me that it's not just about moving on. It's about building something new, together. I'm grateful for every moment we've shared and every challenge we've faced." The crowd erupted in applause, and Ella made her way to the stage, standing beside Lucas. She leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. "And I'm grateful for you, Lucas." They stood together as the music resumed, Grace's laughter adding to the chorus of joy that surrounded them. As the months passed, Lucas and Ella continued to build a life filled with shared moments and quiet contentment. They balanced the responsibilities of parenthood with their passions, finding time to nurture their relationship amidst the whirlwind of work and community involvement. One evening, as they sat on the back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ella turned to Lucas, a contemplative look in her eyes. "Where do you see us in 5 years?" Lucas thought for a moment, the warmth of the day's last light reflecting in his gaze. "Right here, but with more memories, more laughter. Maybe even a sibling for Grace." Ella's smile widened. "I like that vision." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together, one day at a time." The porch grew quiet, the night air filled with the sounds of crickets and distant laughter from the garden. They sat in the peaceful silence, the past woven seamlessly into the present and pointing toward a future filled with love, resilience, and the promise of endless tomorrows. The summer rolled on, bringing new faces to the estate's community events. Lucas and Ella had become known for their open gatherings, which fostered a sense of togetherness that resonated throughout the town. One evening, as the sun dipped low and guests mingled with glasses of lemonade and plates of homemade treats, Ella stood by the garden's edge. Taking in the scene, Grace toddled nearby, her giggles carried on the breeze. Lucas scooped her up and spun her around, her laughter drawing smiles from onlookers. Ella's heart swelled at the sight, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the life they'd built. "Ella, this place is incredible," said Mary, a local artist who had been part of the showcase that first rejuvenated the estate. "You and Lucas have done something special here." "Thank you, Mary," Ella said, a smile spreading across her face. "It's not just us, it's everyone who shows up, shares their stories, and makes this feel like home." Lucas walked over, Grace still in his arms, her tiny hands reaching for Ella. She took her daughter and kissed her cheek, the warmth of the moment settling into her bones. "We should think about expanding," Lucas said, his tone casual, but his eyes bright with ambition. "There's so much potential here." Ella raised an eyebrow. "Expanding how?" "Workshops, art classes, maybe even a summer camp for kids," he said. "Something that keeps building this sense of community." Ella's smile deepened, and she felt the excitement bubbling up. "I'm in. Let's start planning." The following week, Lucas and Ella gathered a small team of volunteers and friends to brainstorm their expansion. They set up a meeting in the library, the long table covered in sketches, maps of the estate, and notepads filled with ideas. Grace played on a blanket nearby, entertained by Samantha, who had become an honorary aunt. "I think using the East Wing as an art and activity center makes sense," Ella suggested, pointing to a section on the map. "It's close enough to the garden, but separate enough to keep things organized." Lucas nodded, eyes scanning the notes. "And we can renovate the greenhouse for hands-on gardening workshops. It'll give kids a chance to learn about plants and nature." Samantha, listening while Grace tugged at her hair, chimed in. "You two are going to turn this place into a landmark." "It already is," Lucas said, sharing a smile with Ella. The meeting went on into the evening, ideas flowing as laughter and camaraderie filled the room. When the last volunteer left and the house grew quiet again, Lucas turned to Ella, the light in his eyes softened by the day's work. "We're doing this," he said, his voice full of awe. "We really are," Ella replied, leaning in for a kiss that spoke of shared dreams and the path they were carving out together. As construction and renovations began, so did the unexpected challenges. Weather delays pushed timelines back, and sourcing sustainable materials became an exercise in patience. Lucas often found himself on the phone with suppliers, his brow furrowed in frustration as Ella managed on-site logistics with the workers. One particularly rainy afternoon, after a call that ended with more complications, Lucas walked into the kitchen to find Ella wiping down counters, tension visible in her stance. "Rough day?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Lucas let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair. More delays. It's like every step forward comes with 2 steps back. Ella walked over and wrapped her arms around him, her presence calming. We knew this wouldn't be easy, but we're not in this alone. He looked down at her, the worry in his face easing. You're right. As long as we're in this together, we'll get through it. Their moment was interrupted by Grace toddling in, her eyes bright with curiosity as she babbled incomprehensible words. They both laughed, the sound cutting through the frustration and reminding them of what truly mattered. After weeks of setbacks, progress finally took a turn. The greenhouse renovations were completed, and the first test class, a small gardening workshop for local children, was scheduled. The estate buzzed with activity as families arrived, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves and the chirping of birds. Lucas watched from the sidelines as Ella guided a group of children through planting their first seeds. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, her enthusiasm mirrored in the faces of her young audience. Grace sat on a blanket nearby, clapping her hands and giggling at the sight of the children playing. Samantha approached Lucas, nudging his arm. "You look proud," she said. "I am," Lucas replied, eyes never leaving Ella. "This is everything we hoped for." The workshop ended with parents thanking Ella for the experience and kids showing off their small potted plants. As the last of the families left, Lucas walked over to Ella, who was cleaning up stray soil with a satisfied grin. "You were amazing," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Ella leaned into him, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "It felt right, didn't it? Like this is exactly what this place is meant for." "It is," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And it's only the beginning." The success of the first workshop spurred a series of events that brought more life to the estate. Art classes, summer picnics, and charity auctions became regular occurrences. The mansion, once a solemn testament to loss, was now a thriving hub for connection and creativity. One evening, Lucas and Ella stood on the back porch, watching as the last of the guests from an art showcase drove away. The garden was lit by soft lanterns, their glow casting a warm light over the flowers and walkways. "I think we've done it," Lucas said, slipping an arm around Ella's waist. "We've turned this place into something special." Ella turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. "We have, and I wouldn't have wanted to do it with anyone else." Lucas leaned in, their foreheads touching as the night settled around them. "This is our legacy, Ella. One that Grace can grow up with and be proud of, and one that shows her what it means to love, to grow, and to keep moving forward," Ella added, her voice soft. They stood there, holding each other as the crickets sang and the estate rested under a canopy of stars. The journey had been full of unexpected turns, but each moment had led them to this, a life rebuilt, filled with hope and woven with love. The season shifted, bringing the cool breeze of fall. The estate continued to thrive, with new events and fresh faces filling its halls and gardens. Lucas and Ella watched Grace take her first steps, in the very garden where they had first found hope together. The small, tentative steps were met with laughter and applause from friends who had gathered for a community lunch. As Lucas knelt to pick Grace up, he caught Ella's eye, and they shared a look that spoke volumes. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. They were here, in this moment, with their daughter and their dreams. Proof that life could be rebuilt, not in the shadow of loss, but in the light of new beginnings. Lucas stood, Grace in his arms, and reached for Ella's hand. "Ready for what comes next?" he asked, a playful challenge in his voice. "Always," Ella replied, squeezing his hand. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the estate as they walked back inside. A family made whole by the promise of tomorrow. As autumn deepened, the estate transitioned from lively summer events to cozy, intimate gatherings. The garden's vibrant greens turned to warm hues of gold and crimson, and the air carried a crispness that spoke of change and reflection. Lucas found himself spending quiet moments by the fire with Ella and Grace, soaking in the warmth of their shared evenings. One night, after putting Grace to bed, Lucas and Ella sat on the couch, the flicker of the fire casting shadows across the room. Lucas leaned back, eyes on the dancing flames. Do you ever think about how far we've come? He asked, his voice low and thoughtful. Ella rested her head on his shoulder. All the time. It feels like we've lived a lifetime in just a few years. Lucas nodded, taking her hand in his. Sometimes I think about the days when this place was so quiet, when I felt like I was just existing. Ella squeezed his hand, a soft smile playing on her lips. And now? Now I'm living, Lucas said, turning to meet her eyes. Because of you, because of what we've built together. They sat in comfortable silence, the past no longer casting a shadow, but serving as a foundation for their present. The fire crackled, filling the room with a sense of peace. The estate continued to be a place where the town gathered, especially as the holiday season approached. The first frost came early, glazing the windows and sparking excitement for the annual winter festival that Lucas and Ella had decided to host. Ella busied herself with planning, her to-do lists expanding as the date drew near. Samantha helped with organizing the logistics, while volunteers decorated the estate with twinkling lights, garlands, and festive centerpieces. Lucas watched Ella orchestrate the preparations with a blend of admiration and amusement. "You're in your element," he said one evening, as she adjusted a wreath over the fireplace. "I guess I am," Ella admitted, her eyes twinkling. "There's something special about bringing people together." The night of the festival arrived, and the mansion was filled with the warm glow of string lights and the hum of conversation. Children played games in the garden, their laughter ringing out into the chilly night, while adults gathered around fire pits with mugs of hot cocoa. Lucas stood at the edge of the garden taking in the scene. The estate, once marked by loss, now thrived with life. He felt a hand slip into his and turned to see Ella, her eyes reflecting the light of the festival. "It's perfect," she said. Lucas smiled, pulling her close. "Because of you." As the festival wound down, Lucas found himself sitting on a bench, Grace asleep in his arms. The sky above was a deep, starlit expanse, and the soft murmur of the crowd provided a soothing backdrop. Ella joined him, draping a blanket over Grace. "You've come a long way, Lucas," she said, her voice filled with pride. "I remember when you couldn't imagine opening up again, and now look at what you've created." Lucas looked down at Grace, her tiny hand curled around his thumb. "I couldn't have done it without you. You taught me that love doesn't end. It changes and grows." Ella's eyes glistened as she leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "We're stronger together, Lucas, and I'm grateful for every day of this life we've built." The night air was cool, but their shared warmth and the comfort of the moment made it feel like home. They sat there as the last of the festival lights twinkled, a shared understanding passing between them. The path they had walked wasn't easy, but it had led them here, to this moment, this family, and the quiet promise of many more to come. Winter deepened, and life settled into a gentle rhythm. Lucas and Ella spent their mornings with Grace, building snowmen in the yard and watching as the world turned white around them. Evenings were spent indoors, warmed by the fire and the sound of Grace's laughter. One afternoon, while Ella was reviewing plans for a spring event in the greenhouse, Lucas appeared with a look of excitement. "I have an idea," he said, holding a piece of paper that looked well-worn. Ella raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "This looks serious." "It is," Lucas replied, sitting beside her. "I've been thinking about ways we can grow what we've started. What if we partner with local schools to create a series of programs that teach kids about sustainability, art, and community engagement?" Ella's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant, Lucas. It would give so many more people the chance to experience what we've built here." He smiled, the sense of purpose evident in his gaze. "I want this place to be more than just a home for us. I want it to be a legacy." Ella took his hand, her heart full. "Then let's do it. Together." Spring came early, painting the estate in bright greens and bursts of color. The first group of school children arrived for the sustainability program, their excitement palpable as they explored the greenhouse and learned about planting from Ella and local volunteers. Lucas watched from a distance, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. Samantha joined him, her smile wide as she observed the bustling scene. "This is everything we hoped it would be," she said. Lucas nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "It is, and it's only going to grow from here." As the children's laughter rang out across the estate, Ella turned and caught Lucas's eye. She waved, and he waved back, the connection between them as strong as ever. "I think we've done something good here," Ella said when she joined him a few minutes later. Lucas wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We have, and it's only the beginning." The garden, filled with life and hope, stood as a testament to their journey, from grief and isolation to love and renewal. They had rebuilt not just a house, but a life full of meaning and connection. And as they looked out at the future they had created, hand in hand, they knew that the best was yet to come. The success of their community programs brought fresh attention to the estate. Articles were written, praising the revitalization project and highlighting the positive impact on the town. Lucas and Ella received invitations to speak at local events and share their story of resilience and renewal. One day, as they walked through the garden discussing plans for the next season's events, a letter arrived from a state arts and culture committee. Ella opened it, her eyes widening with surprise. "It's an invitation," she said, reading further. "They want us to present our community model at a state conference." Lucas raised an eyebrow, a smile forming. "They want us to talk about our little project here?" Ella looked up at him, excitement and pride in her expression. "It's more than a little project now, Lucas. This could inspire other communities to build their own spaces of connection." Lucas nodded, the gravity of what they had achieved settling over him. "Then let's do it. Let's share what we've learned." The following weeks were a flurry of preparation. They drafted speeches, compiled photos, and gathered testimonials from those whose lives had been touched by the estate's programs. The process brought back memories of the early days, reminding them of how far they had come, not just as partners in life, but as stewards of something bigger. The day of the state conference arrived, and Lucas and Ella found themselves in a large auditorium filled with community leaders, educators, and nonprofit organizers. Samantha had flown in to support them, her encouragement a familiar anchor. Lucas glanced at Ella, who wore a tailored dress and an expression of calm confidence. She squeezed his hand as they waited backstage. "We've got this," she whispered. When their names were called, they stepped onto the stage together, the bright lights illuminating the room. Lucas cleared his throat, scanning the audience before speaking. 5 years ago, this was just an idea born out of necessity, a way to bring life back into a place that had known too much silence. Ella continued, her voice warm and resonant. "But it became so much more. We realized that healing is not just a personal journey. It's something that can be shared, something that can inspire and build community." As they spoke, a quiet sense of pride welled up in both of them. They shared stories of the first event, the workshops that followed, and the children who had taken their first steps toward understanding sustainability in their greenhouse. Photos played on the screen behind them, showing laughter, art, and the garden blooming with life. The applause that followed was thunderous. Lucas glanced at Ella, his heart full. They had shared their story, not just the story of loss, but the story of what came after, of rebuilding and finding joy again. After their presentation, a woman from a prominent foundation approached them. Her name was Rachel Porter, and she exuded a blend of warmth and professionalism. "I'm incredibly moved by what you two have created," Rachel said, shaking their hands. "Our foundation is looking to sponsor projects that bring sustainable community practices to other towns. Would you be interested in expanding your model beyond the estate?" Lucas and Ella exchanged a look, excitement sparking between them. The idea of expanding their vision beyond their town was daunting, but it was also an opportunity to spread the very thing that had given them a second chance. "We'd love to discuss it," Lucas said, glancing at Ella, who nodded in agreement. Rachel's smile widened. "I'll set up a meeting. I think this is the start of something even bigger." That night, back at their hotel, Lucas and Ella sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of autumn leaves and distant traffic. "I can't believe this is happening," Ella said, leaning against Lucas. "It feels surreal." "It does," Lucas admitted, wrapping an arm around her. "But if anyone can make it happen, it's you." Ella laughed softly. "Us, Lucas. We do this together." Lucas turned to her, the city's glow reflected in his eyes. "I know, and I wouldn't have it any other way." They sat in silence for a while, letting the excitement and possibilities sink in. It was clear that their story wasn't just about loss and recovery. It was about how two people found strength in each other and turned their shared resilience into something that would outlast them. When they returned to the estate, Grace ran out to greet them, her laughter ringing through the garden. Lucas scooped her up, spinning her around as Ella watched, her heart swelling with love. "Guess what, Grace?" Ella said, crouching down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Mommy and Daddy are going to help other places build gardens just like ours." Grace's eyes lit up with excitement, though her young mind couldn't fully grasp the concept. "Will there be flowers?" she asked, clapping her hands. "Yes, sweetheart. Lots and lots of flowers," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. They walked inside as the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the estate. The future felt vast, filled with opportunities and unknowns, but they were ready for it. They had faced darkness before and come out stronger. Now, with their story spreading beyond the estate, they knew they were part of something even greater, a movement toward connection, resilience, and hope. In the months that followed, Lucas and Ella worked closely with Rachel Porter's foundation, drafting plans to bring their community model to other towns. The estate continued to thrive, hosting new events and welcoming visitors eager to learn and participate. One afternoon, as they stood on the porch watching the volunteers and guests scatter across the garden, Ella turned to Lucas. "Do you think we'll ever slow down?" Lucas laughed, a deep, contented sound. "Not a chance, but that's what makes this life worth living." Ella smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let's keep going." The garden, once a place marked by loss, now stood as a living testament to love, perseverance, and the beauty of starting again. It was a story that had begun in silence and grief, but was now written in laughter, growth, and shared dreams. And as they faced the horizon, Lucas and Ella knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, together, ready for whatever came next. Lucas and Ella's partnership with Rachel Porter's foundation moved quickly from concept to reality. Plans were made to host seminars at the estate, where community leaders from other towns could visit, learn, and take inspiration back with them. The first of these gatherings was set for spring, allowing Lucas and Ella time to prepare. One winter morning, Lucas stood by the large window in the library, looking out at the snow-draped garden. The scene was serene, a reminder of how the estate had transformed from a symbol of grief into a place of renewal. Ella entered, a folder of notes in her hand, and smiled when she saw him lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, setting the folder down and walking over. Lucas turned, his eyes warming at the sight of her. "Just thinking about how much has changed. How much we have changed." Ella wrapped her arms around him, leaning into the comfort of his embrace. "It's hard to believe sometimes, but we did it. And we're not done yet." "No, we're not," Lucas said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "The best part is that we're taking what we've built and sharing it. It feels right." Ella nodded, the excitement in her eyes mirroring his. "It does." As the first day of the seminar approached, the estate buzzed with activity. Volunteers set up tables and tents in the garden, while caterers prepared food sourced from local farmers. The air was crisp, but the sun shone brightly, casting a hopeful light over the preparations. The guests arrived in small groups, community leaders and nonprofit organizers from towns across the state. Lucas and Ella stood at the entrance, welcoming each group and guiding them toward the main hall where opening remarks would be made. One guest, a middle-aged man with a warm smile, shook Lucas's hand. "I've heard a lot about this place," he said. "Seeing it in person is inspiring." "Thank you," Lucas replied. "We hope it gives you some ideas to take back home." Ella greeted a young woman from a town a few hours away who specialized in youth engagement. "This is exactly what we need," the woman said, eyes alight with enthusiasm. "I can't wait to bring some of these ideas to our community center." The hall filled with conversation, the hum of voices and laughter mingling with the scent of fresh flowers and hot coffee. It felt like the culmination of everything they had worked for. Lucas took the stage, the room quieting as he approached the microphone. He scanned the crowd, recognizing the same hope and apprehension he'd felt years ago when the idea of rebuilding seemed impossible. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "This estate once stood as a place of loss. It was quiet, filled with echoes of the past. But when I opened my heart to new possibilities and the people who believed in me, it became something different, a place of community, growth, and connection." He glanced at Ella, who stood at the back, her eyes locked on him with pride. "And it wouldn't have been possible without someone who saw what this place, and what I, could become." Ella stepped forward, taking her place beside Lucas. "Our journey here wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. We learned that healing is not linear, and growth is born from the moments when we choose to embrace the unknown." The audience erupted into applause, and Lucas felt the familiar surge of gratitude that came with sharing their story. They spent the rest of the day moving between workshops, discussing topics from sustainable gardening practices to fostering inclusive community spaces. The seminar continued over the next few days, and Lucas and Ella found themselves surrounded by stories of resilience and hope from the guests. There were tales of communities overcoming disasters, towns rallying around local causes, and leaders working tirelessly to support their neighbors. One evening, as the guests gathered around a bonfire in the garden, Lucas sat next to Ella, listening to the laughter and chatter. Rachel Porter joined them, her face lit by the warm glow of the fire. "You've created something that's going to ripple out beyond this estate," Rachel said, her voice low but full of conviction. "These people will go home and make changes that will echo for years." Lucas nodded, the magnitude of her words settling over him. "That's the hope," he said, glancing at Ella. "That what started as a way to heal becomes a way for others to thrive." Ella reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "It already has." The last day of the seminar dawned bright and cold, and the estate was filled with the energy of new beginnings. Guests exchanged contact information, promised future collaborations, and shared final words of encouragement. Lucas and Ella stood at the entrance, bidding farewell to the participants as they left. One woman, who had shared her story of revitalizing her neighborhood park, turned to Ella with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for giving us hope," she said. "I didn't know where to start, but now I do." Ella hugged her, the simple gesture conveying what words could not. As the last car pulled away, Lucas turned to Ella, the quiet settling in like an old friend. "We've done something good here, haven't we?" Ella asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but full of joy. Lucas nodded, pulling her close. "We have, and it's only the beginning." That evening, the estate was quiet again, the echoes of the seminar's success lingering in the halls. Lucas and Ella sat in the library with Grace, who babbled happily as she played with her toys. "Do you think she'll remember this place like we do?" Lucas asked, watching their daughter. Ella smiled, reaching out to tuck a curl behind Grace's ear. "She'll grow up surrounded by it, by stories of resilience and love. It'll be a part of her, just like it's a part of us." Lucas looked at Ella, the realization of how far they'd come washing over him. They weren't just rebuilding a house, they were nurturing a legacy of hope and connection that would stretch far beyond their lifetimes. "I think we're ready for whatever comes next," Lucas said, confidence in his voice. "We are," Ella agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. They watched as Grace toddled across the room, giggling as she discovered a new toy. The room was filled with her laughter, the sound of life moving forward, step by step, into a future that promised endless possibilities. With the success of the seminar behind them, Lucas and Ella began expanding their community efforts beyond the estate. The initial workshop had sparked interest from neighboring towns, and soon requests for collaboration started pouring in. They found themselves traveling to other communities, sharing their experiences and helping establish similar initiatives. One evening, after a long day of meetings in a nearby town, Lucas and Ella returned home to find Samantha playing with Grace in the living room. The scene warmed Ella's heart. Grace was laughing as Samantha held up a puppet, its felt mouth opening and closing in exaggerated movements. "Looks like you two had fun," Ella said, setting her bag down and joining them on the floor. "We did," Samantha replied, her eyes twinkling. "She's a natural storyteller. Takes after her mom, I think." Lucas chuckled, sinking onto the couch. "Or her dad. We've both told our fair share of stories these past few years." Samantha's expression softened as she looked at them. "You know, watching you both build this life has been inspiring. It's proof that resilience can lead to more than just surviving. It can lead to something beautiful." Ella reached for Lucas's hand, squeezing it gently. "That's what we hope people see when they come here." A few weeks later, as the last of the autumn leaves fell and the chill of winter set in, the estate received an unexpected visit from Grace's namesake, Lucas's mother, Margaret. The two had stayed in touch over the years, their relationship mended through letters and occasional calls. But this was her first visit to the estate since Lucas and Ella's life together began. Margaret stepped out of the car, her silver hair catching the late afternoon light. Lucas walked forward, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and nerves. "Mom," he said, opening his arms. "Lucas," Margaret replied, her voice warm and filled with emotion as she hugged him tightly. She turned to Ella, eyes softening. "Ella, it's so good to finally be here." "Welcome," Ella said, smiling as she embraced her mother-in-law. "We're glad you came." Margaret's eyes lit up when she spotted Grace toddling toward her, curious and unsteady. "And this must be my little namesake," she said, bending down and scooping Grace up with practiced ease. Grace giggled, the sound breaking any tension that lingered. As they walked into the house, Margaret took in the renovations, the new life that filled the space. "This place has changed so much," she said, her voice carrying a note of awe. "But I can feel the love here." Lucas nodded, the lump in his throat easing. "It has. And so have we." Over the following days, Margaret's visit became an unexpected gift. She shared stories of Lucas's childhood, tales Ella hadn't heard before, filled with mischief and laughter. Grace sat on Margaret's lap, wide-eyed, as her grandmother animatedly recounted how Lucas had once tried to build a treehouse out of scrap wood and rope. "Did it work?" Ella asked, a playful grin on her face. Lucas rolled his eyes, a smile tugging at his lips. "Barely? It fell apart as soon as I climbed into it." Margaret laughed, a sound that hadn't been heard in the mansion in years. "But he learned to build, and look where that led." One evening, after Grace had gone to bed, Margaret sat with Lucas and Ella in the living room. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow over them. "I wanted to tell you both how proud I am," Margaret said, her eyes glistening. "Lucas, I know how hard it was for you to move forward after everything. And Ella, thank you for being his partner, for building this life with him." Ella reached out, taking Margaret's hand. "It's been a journey, but one I wouldn't trade for anything." Margaret smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's more than I ever hoped for you." As winter deepened, Lucas and Ella decided to start a new tradition, an annual holiday gathering that would bring together everyone who had been part of their journey. Invitations were sent out, and the estate was decorated with lights, wreaths, and the scent of pine. The night of the gathering, the mansion hummed with life. Guests filled the rooms, sharing stories, laughter, and warm drinks. Margaret, Samantha, Grace, and the familiar faces of volunteers and friends mingled throughout the halls. Lucas stood near the grand piano, where a neighbor played a soft, cheerful tune. He watched as Grace toddled from guest to guest, collecting smiles and pats on the head. Ella caught his eye from across the room, a look of pure joy lighting up her face. She walked over and stood beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. "This is everything we wanted, isn't it?" she asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "It is," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "And more." As the evening continued, Lucas found himself reflecting on the years behind them, the grief, the challenges, and the choices that had led them here. It hadn't been an easy path, but it was one that had brought them more than they ever could have imagined. The holiday gathering ended with guests trickling out into the night, their laughter and goodbyes echoing through the crisp air. Lucas and Ella stood at the front door, waving as the last car pulled away. The night had gone perfectly, a testament to how much their lives had changed. Inside, Grace was already asleep, tucked in by Margaret, who had retired to her guest room with a smile and a whispered good night. The house was quiet again, the only sounds the crackling fire and the faint rustle of wind outside. Lucas pulled Ella into his arms, holding her close. "We've done so much," he whispered, "and there's so much more to do." Ella looked up at him, her eyes warm with shared dreams. "Then let's keep going, Lucas. Let's keep building, growing, and facing whatever comes next." They stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, the quiet night stretching ahead like a promise. The journey that had begun in grief had become a story of love, hope, and endless possibilities. And as they looked forward, they knew they would face it all together, stronger, wiser, and more in love than ever. The mansion, now full of laughter and light, stood as a beacon of their resilience and the life they had chosen to build. Not just for themselves, but for their community and the generations to come. As the days of winter gradually lengthened, Lucas and Ella spent quiet mornings sipping coffee by the window, watching as the frost melted away under the pale sunlight. The mansion, now a symbol of warmth and hope, continued to welcome visitors and host community events, each one reinforcing the mission they had set for themselves. One afternoon, while sorting through a collection of photos taken during the estate's various events, Ella paused at an image of Grace, standing amidst the blooming flowers, laughing at the world around her. Lucas entered the room and caught sight of the photo over her shoulder. "She looks so happy," Lucas said, a soft smile touching his lips. Ella nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She is. And it's because of what we've built here." They stood in silence, letting the memories wash over them. The mansion had become more than a home. It was a living chronicle of their journey, marked by every laugh, every shared meal, and every community gathering that filled its halls. One evening, while reviewing plans for the estate's next phase, Lucas received a call from Rachel Porter. Her voice crackled with excitement as she relayed the news that an international nonprofit was interested in partnering with them to develop similar community projects abroad. "It's an incredible opportunity, Lucas," Rachel said. "They've seen what you and Ella have done and want to bring that vision to other places that need hope and growth." Lucas exchanged a glance with Ella, who had been listening in with wide eyes. "This could be bigger than we ever imagined," he said, after the call ended. Ella's face was a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "It's amazing, but it's a huge step. Are we ready for that?" Lucas took her hands in his, squeezing them gently. "I think we are, and if we're not, we'll learn, just like we always have." Over the following months, Lucas and Ella worked on the details of the partnership with the international nonprofit. Their days were filled with meetings, planning sessions, and late nights brainstorming how to adapt their model for different cultures and communities. Margaret, who had extended her visit, became a valuable sounding board, offering insights and encouragement. "Traveling for this will be different," Margaret said one evening, watching as Grace played with blocks at her feet. "But you'll be giving so much to so many people." Lucas nodded. "And it'll be a chance to show Grace that making a difference isn't limited to one place." Ella smiled, her eyes catching Lucas's. "We'll be showing her that love and community are universal." The time for their first trip arrived, and Lucas and Ella prepared to leave Grace in Margaret's capable hands. The little girl waved from the porch, her tiny hand clutching a teddy bear as Lucas and Ella walked toward the car. "We'll be back soon, sweetheart," Ella called, her voice carrying both reassurance and a tinge of longing. Lucas knelt to meet Grace's eyes, kissing her forehead. "Be good for Grandma, okay?" Grace nodded solemnly, her wide eyes filled with curiosity as she watched them leave. The flight was long, giving Lucas and Ella time to reflect on the journey that had led them here. They spoke in soft tones about their hopes for the project and what they wanted to achieve. When the plane touched down, a new chapter of their shared mission began. Their destination was a small town that had suffered recent hardships and was in need of revitalization. Lucas and Ella were greeted by local leaders who welcomed them with open arms, eager to learn from their experiences. Over the next few days, they worked side by side with the townspeople, sharing their knowledge and learning from the community's resilience and creativity. Ella found herself deeply moved by the similarities between their own story and those of the people they met. Individuals who had faced loss but refused to let it define them. One evening, as they gathered around a communal fire with their hosts, Lucas spoke about the importance of connection. "It's not just about what we build," he said, his voice steady. "It's about who we build it with and the stories we share." A young woman in the crowd, who had lost her home in a flood, nodded. "It's true. When we come together, we become stronger." Ella felt a familiar warmth in her chest. It was the same feeling she had when they first revived the estate. A reminder that hope, when shared, could ripple outwards. After weeks of working with the town, Lucas and Ella returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. Grace ran to meet them as they stepped out of the car, her giggles filling the crisp evening air. Margaret stood behind her, smiling warmly. "Welcome home," she said, her eyes misting over as she watched Lucas and Ella embrace Grace. Lucas lifted his daughter into his arms, pressing a kiss to her cheek. "We missed you, Gracie." Ella wrapped her arms around both of them, the weight of their journey settling into the warmth of home. "We did," she said softly, tears of happiness pricking her eyes. The mansion glowed in the twilight, its windows lit with the golden hue of welcome. Inside, Samantha had arranged a simple dinner, a gesture that spoke of family and the bonds they had built over time. As they sat together that evening, the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the room. The estate, once a symbol of loss, now thrived as a beacon of renewal, unity, and love. Lucas looked around the table, his heart full. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice carrying a promise that stretched beyond the walls of the mansion. Ella smiled, her hand finding his under the table. "It always has been." The journey that had started with healing had evolved into a legacy, one that would carry on, fueled by resilience, shared stories, and the unwavering belief that hope was not just a fleeting moment, but a foundation on which to build a life. And as the night deepened and the house settled into peaceful quiet, Lucas and Ella knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, ready for the challenges and joys that lay ahead. The weeks following Lucas and Ella's return were filled with stories shared and lessons learned. The town they'd visited had already begun implementing some of the community-building initiatives, sending updates and photos of small gardens sprouting and workshops bustling with life. It brought an overwhelming sense of pride and fulfillment to Lucas and Ella as they watched their vision inspire growth beyond their immediate reach. Samantha visited the estate one morning, armed with a new collection of reports and letters from other towns interested in adopting their model. "You're making waves, you know," she said, setting the stack of papers on the kitchen table. "This is becoming bigger than we ever imagined." Ella picked up a letter, scanning the words and feeling a rush of emotion. It was from a teacher in a small rural town who had started a youth program inspired by their work, writing that the students were now looking forward to their weekly community garden sessions. Lucas read over her shoulder, a smile spreading across his face. "It's humbling, isn't it, to know that what started here has grown so far?" Ella nodded, her eyes misty. "It makes everything worth it." With the estate bustling again and community events filling their schedule, Lucas and Ella decided it was time to create something special for Grace. A small project that would blend their family's love of nature and learning. They envisioned a children's garden within the estate, filled with paths, small benches, and playful installations for storytelling sessions. The morning they revealed it to Grace, the air was filled with the scent of flowers and the sound of birds. Grace's eyes widened as she stepped into the garden, taking in the colorful blooms and tiny wooden playhouses scattered throughout. "Do you like it, sweetheart?" Lucas asked, kneeling beside her. Grace's face lit up with joy as she spun around, her laughter ringing through the garden. "I love it." Ella smiled, watching her daughter run from flower to flower. "This is for you," she said softly, brushing her fingers through Grace's hair. "So, you always have a place to dream." Margaret, who had come to see the new addition, wiped a tear from her cheek. "She'll grow up with so much love and beauty around her," she said, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "We hope so," Lucas replied, his voice steady but full of emotion. As winter turned into spring, the estate continued to evolve, hosting more visitors and spreading the values that Lucas and Ella had championed. With each event, more connections were forged and new stories were shared. One evening, Lucas invited several local leaders to join them for a dinner in the garden, under the soft glow of lanterns. Conversations flowed easily, touching on everything from challenges in community outreach to personal stories of resilience. Ella found herself talking to a young artist who had started a program teaching underprivileged youth to paint. His eyes shone as he spoke about the impact it was having on the children. "It's amazing what one idea can do," he said. "Your work here inspired me to try, and now the kids are thriving." Ella felt a lump in her throat, the weight of the moment pressing on her. "Thank you for telling me. It means more than you know." Lucas, meanwhile, listened to an elderly couple recount how they'd volunteered to lead gardening workshops at a senior center, sparking newfound joy among residents. The stories reminded him of the power of connection and the simple truth that hope, once shared, could grow exponentially. Later that night, after the guests had left and the garden had settled into a peaceful quiet, Lucas and Ella sat together, watching the stars. The estate was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a cricket. "I was thinking about the first time we stood in this garden together," Lucas said, his voice soft and filled with nostalgia. "How different everything was." Ella rested her head against his shoulder. "It was the beginning of everything. We didn't know where it would lead, but we took the step. And now look at where it's brought us," Lucas said, gesturing at the estate around them. "It's not just a place, it's a story of moving forward." Ella smiled, the truth of his words resonating deep within her. "And it's still being written." Lucas turned, taking her hand in his. "And we'll write it together." The following week, an invitation arrived that would take their story to yet another level. It was from an international conference on community development, inviting Lucas and Ella to speak on a panel about transforming personal loss into collective growth. The conference was to be held in a major city, bringing together leaders and changemakers from around the world. As Lucas read the invitation aloud, Ella felt a mixture of excitement and anticipation. "This could help us share our message even further," she said. "It could," Lucas agreed, a thoughtful smile crossing his face. "It's a chance to show that what we built here isn't just unique to us. It's something that can inspire and take root anywhere." Margaret, who had joined them in the living room, clapped her hands. "I'll stay with Grace, of course," she said, her eyes bright. "This is important, and you two need to go." The preparations for the conference were intense. Lucas and Ella worked late into the night, refining their presentation and choosing which stories to share. They wanted to balance personal reflections with practical insights, showing not only how they had rebuilt their lives, but how others could too. As the departure date neared, they sat in the nursery with Grace, reading her favorite story. The room was filled with the sound of her giggles, and Lucas felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the blend of love and the bittersweet ache of leaving, even for just a few days. "We'll be back before you know it," Ella whispered, tucking Grace in and kissing her forehead. Grace's eyes drooped with sleep, but she smiled. "Night, Mama. Night, Daddy." Lucas took Ella's hand as they stood, the soft light of the nursery casting a warm glow around them. "She'll be fine," Ella said, more to reassure herself than Lucas. "I know," Lucas replied, wrapping an arm around her. "And so will we." The day of the conference arrived, and Lucas and Ella stood on a stage facing an audience that represented countless stories of resilience and hope. As they shared their journey, the room grew quiet, absorbing every word. They spoke of loss, learning, and love, of how an empty house became a symbol of community and a new beginning. When they finished, the applause was loud and heartfelt. A woman in the front row stood, eyes glistening. "Thank you for reminding us that we can choose to grow from our pain," she said. The audience nodded in silent agreement. Ella reached for Lucas's hand, squeezing it as she felt the energy in the room. It was a moment that solidified their mission, a reminder that their story was not just theirs, but one that could inspire a collective movement toward healing and connection. As they boarded the plane to return home, Ella leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder, exhaustion mingling with a deep sense of fulfillment. "We did it," she said, her voice soft. "We did," Lucas replied, placing a kiss on her temple. "And we'll keep doing it, one step at a time." The view from the window shifted as the plane took off, the horizon stretching ahead, a reminder of all that had been and all that was yet to come. The story of their lives was still unfolding, marked by challenges, victories, and the steadfast belief that hope, when nurtured, could spread farther than they ever imagined. And as they flew home to Grace, back to the estate that had become a beacon of light, Lucas and Ella knew they were ready for whatever the future would hold. Together, always facing forward. Returning home from the conference brought a renewed energy to Lucas and Ella. The estate, with its welcoming embrace and familiar scents, felt even more precious after their travels. Margaret had kept everything running smoothly, and Grace greeted her parents with shrieks of joy, clutching at their legs and babbling excitedly about her adventures with Grandma Maggie. "We missed you so much," Ella said, lifting Grace into her arms and pressing a kiss to her cheek. Lucas reached out, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Did you have fun while we were gone?" Grace nodded solemnly, her wide eyes full of stories she couldn't quite form into words. Margaret stood in the doorway, a smile of satisfaction on her face as she watched the reunion. "She was an angel," Margaret said, adding with a wink, "Well, most of the time." Laughter filled the foyer, a sound that echoed through the halls and reminded everyone of how far they'd come. The mansion, once silent and weighed down by memories, was now a place of warmth and laughter. With their story having reached new audiences, the estate received an influx of inquiries from people wanting to visit, learn, and contribute to the growing community. The idea of turning their home into a training center for community leaders began to take shape, with Lucas and Ella considering workshops, lectures, and immersive programs to teach others how to build similar projects. Samantha, who had been their steadfast supporter from the beginning, joined them at the kitchen table one afternoon. Maps and proposals spread out before them. "This could be the next big step," she said, pointing to a section of the estate that could be converted into classrooms, a place where people can come and learn, not just read about what you did. Lucas looked at Ella, their shared excitement palpable. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think we should go for it," Ella said, eyes sparkling. "This estate started as a way to heal and grew into a community. Now it can be a place that inspires change on an even larger scale." Lucas nodded, already envisioning what it could become. "Then let's make it happen." The following weeks were filled with activity, as Lucas and Ella mapped out their vision for the new educational center. Architects and contractors visited the estate, sketching designs and discussing renovations. The space would include classrooms, meeting areas, and an expanded greenhouse for hands-on learning. Ella's favorite part of the planning was designing the community spaces, rooms filled with natural light, art from local creators, and places that encouraged collaboration and conversation. One evening, after hours of planning, Lucas and Ella sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and rose. The quiet was a welcome respite, a moment to breathe amidst the whirlwind of their plans. "Do you ever think about what Mia would say if she could see all of this?" Ella asked, her voice gentle. Lucas's expression softened, a thoughtful silence stretching between them. "I do," he said finally. "And I think she'd be proud. Not just of what we've built, but of the life we're living now." Ella reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I think so too." As construction began on the new center, the estate welcomed a special guest. Grace's godfather, Jonathan, who had been Lucas's close friend and confidant during the hardest years, visited from out of town. He hadn't seen the estate since its transformation, and as he stepped out of his car, his eyes widened with awe. "Lucas, this is incredible," Jonathan said, taking in the lively scene. Volunteers working in the garden, children playing on the lawn, and the gentle hum of life that filled the estate. "It's come a long way," Lucas said, clapping a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "Come on, let's catch up." They walked through the garden as Lucas recounted stories of the estate's journey. Jonathan listened intently, his admiration clear. "I always knew you had it in you to rebuild, but it's more than I could have imagined." Lucas's gaze drifted to where Ella was speaking with a group of volunteers, Grace running in circles around her. "I didn't do it alone," he said, a note of gratitude in his voice. "It took love, trust, and the right person by my side." Jonathan smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "I can see that. You deserve this, Lucas." Months later, the educational center was ready for its grand opening. The community gathered once more, filling the estate with familiar and new faces. The classrooms were bright and inviting, with walls painted in warm tones and adorned with art created by local children and artists. Ella stood by one of the classroom doors, greeting attendees as they arrived. She wore a light blue dress that matched the sky, her excitement palpable. Lucas joined her, their hands meeting as they watched the space fill with people eager to learn. The program began with speeches, Lucas and Ella sharing stories of resilience and hope. They spoke of what the estate had come to mean, not just to them, but to everyone who had passed through its doors. A round of applause followed, filled with warmth and shared understanding. Margaret sat in the front row, beaming as Grace sat on her lap, clapping along with the crowd. As the event continued, workshops were held, and conversations sparked new ideas and partnerships. The estate buzzed with the energy of collaboration and purpose. Ella caught Lucas's eye across the room, a shared smile passing between them. They were building more than just a place. They were building a legacy. That evening, after the last of the guests had left and the rooms had settled into a peaceful quiet, Lucas and Ella stood outside, the stars above them clear and bright. "We did it," Lucas said, pulling Ella close. Again, Ella laughed, the sound soft and full of joy. "Yes, we did. And we'll keep doing it, won't we?" Lucas kissed her temple, his voice steady. "Always." They turned to look at the estate, its windows glowing warmly against the night sky. It was a place that had been reborn not just once, but many times, molded by hope and the belief that there was always more to come. And as Lucas and Ella stood hand in hand, they knew that this was only the beginning of another chapter. One built on love, resilience, and the unshakable foundation they had created. Together, the estate settled into a natural rhythm, balancing the lively workshops with quiet family moments. Lucas and Ella found joy in watching the educational center grow, their vision expanding with each new story of hope they heard from visitors and partners. The mansion had become a beacon, not just for the community, but for anyone seeking to rebuild from a place of loss and create something beautiful. One late afternoon, Lucas and Ella sat on the porch swing, watching as Grace played in the garden with her friends. The sun cast a warm, golden glow over the estate, making the flowers shimmer and the leaves glisten. The sound of laughter floated through the air, carrying with it a sense of fulfillment. "Sometimes I can't believe how far we've come," Lucas said, breaking the silence. Ella looked at him, a smile curving her lips. "It feels like we've created a world where anything is possible." Lucas nodded, their future unfolding before them like the petals of a flower, each new day a promise of more. He turned to Ella, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Ready to see where else this journey takes us?" She took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "Always." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange, the estate stood as a testament to everything they'd overcome and everything they would continue to build, one day at a time. Thank you for following our story of love, resilience, and the power of community. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more heartfelt tales, make sure to like, share, and hit that subscribe button. Stay connected for more stories that inspire hope and connection.